What strange/eerie things have happened to you? So I walked out into the lounge room one night in the darkness to fetch something, the only light being a soft glow from the kitchen. Now, the way the lounge room was set up, we had one single lounge and clear view from the doorway, and the light switch was a bit of a ways in. So halfway into the room I notice on this lounge the faint, wispy outline of a small white dog staring straight at me. It was completely, eerily still, just staring forward. The only small white dog we own was in my bedroom, and I had in fact walked past her just moments beforehand, so it wasn't her. It also didn't look solid, either, like a weird line drawing made from smudge chalk, but it looked exactly like a small dog. I was instant nope and turned right around and walked out. I went back to my room and picked up my little white dog, for protection, who was still snoozing on the floor, and then went to my sister's room and got her to come with me back into the lounge room. So there we both were, halfway in the lounge room with a faint, wispy outline of this small white dog, staring straight at us without moving a single muscle. After a few seconds, she gets the courage to creep a bit more forward to reach the light switch and flicks it on. It was a plastic shopping bag. So a few years ago, some friends and I had just wrapped up a scary movie night in someone's dorm, and because of the lateness of the hour, we decided to just crash in the dorm. I was on the floor with some other people while my friend and his roommate took the bunk beds. Sometime during the night, I woke up. I didn't have my glasses on, so I was fumbling around for them on the floor when I suddenly got that eerie feeling that something was watching me. I froze, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark shape perched on the foot of my friend's bed on the top bunk, leaning over, staring straight down at me. I slowly turned my head just a little to get a look at it, and it looked like the little kid from The Grudge, one of the movies we just watched, but shrouded in shadow. What disturbed me the most was that everyone else was seemingly oblivious. My friend, on whose bed the thing was sitting, didn't make a peep. I was too terrified to move or even call out, so the night wore on with me staring at it, and it leaning over the bed staring at me, until dawn broke. When light came, I screwed up my courage, snatched my glasses up and put them on and then turned around to face the thing. It was a black metallic balloon my friend had gotten earlier that night. Had a recurring dream I was in a car accident and died. It happened so often I typed the exact events out on my computer so that if I did die that way someone would have proof I saw it coming. What kind of tree I hit, what bones I had broken, how I had died and how I felt myself die. I refused to drive the road it happened on, didn't have an exact location but just knew it was close to home, for a few months and always thought it was how I was going to die. A year later my cousin died in this exact way. Same kind of tree, same bones broken, small town everyone knows everything that happens, was close to his house. He and I were raised like brother/sister and when I heard the news it freaked me out to no end. The part that gets me the most is in my dream I heard them tell my mother I died instantly but I knew it wasn't true. I had felt myself die. So when they told us he died instantly, I lost it. I used to work in a nursing home on the night shift. Often, the patients would hallucinate. One night an old lady said to me, "There's a man wearing a blue coat holding a gun looking through the window." I asked her where and she pointed to the mirror. I didn't think much of it and went on to the next patient. A few hours later in another part of the nursing home, a patient said to me, "There's a man in a blue coat holding a gun to your head." Well, I thought that was pretty creepy but old people hallucinate so I went on with my night. Later that night my supervisor grabbed my arm and hissed into my ear, "Call the police, there's an intruder." I asked her what she was talking about and she pointed down the hall and said there was a man in a blue coat outside one of the patients' rooms looking in. There was no one there. I got her to calm down and convinced her that she must be just tired getting to the end of the shift. I didn't tell her about the patient's hallucinations. After 7 years of working in nursing homes and hospitals, that's one of the creepiest things that I ever experienced. My mom worked nights in nursing homes for years, had plenty of stories about the old folks hallucinating creepy figures at night and such. The weirdest, though, she said this had happened about a dozen times in the 3 years she worked at one place. A few hours before one of the residents passed away, several other residents would ask my mom, "Who's that little girl that was just in here?" There was never any visitors around the time of these hallucinations. A little girl popping up every now and again right before a resident dies. Gives me the creeps. I had what I thought was a lucid dream where I basically watched some figure in my dark room look through my bookshelf, pat me on the head and leave. I woke up to the news from my flatmates that someone had entered our house through the unlocked back door during the night. That's the day I decided to invest for a lock on my bedroom. Story from my parents that involves me, but I was too young to know. Between the ages of 4 and 6 I would always talk to myself when I was in the kitchen. My parents would ask me who I was talking to, and I would say a little boy. This went on for a number of years. One day my parents were driving back from an evening at friends, and it was dark. Just as they went to pull into the driveway, my mother slammed on the brakes. She had seen a little boy run out of the front door of our house and into the road in front of the car. Not only this, but it had instantly flashed daylight at the same time. Like an old movie flashing in front of her face. On top of that, my dad turned to her and said, "Did you see that?" And recounted that he had seen exactly the same thing. For the record, neither of them had been smoking anything. After that, I never spoke to the little boy again. A few weeks ago, I'm now 22, a neighbor from across the road came over to borrow some sugar. My mom invited her in for a cup of tea. This is Britain after all, and they got chatting. Turns out she'd lived on the road for 45 years. They began talking about new street measures that were coming in on our road, my mom pointing out they were good, even though in the 20 years she'd lived in the road there hadn't been an accident. The neighbor then went on to say, a few years before we moved in, that a little boy, of about 6, who lived in our house heard the ice cream man coming and ran out of our house, through the gate, and straight out onto the street to get an ice cream, only to be hit by an oncoming car in the opposite direction. Just where, 16 years ago, both my parents had seen the same thing played out, in that quick flash of broad daylight late at night. Creepiest shit ever. Synchronized visions on behalf of both my parents? Both recounting something that had happened on the street? And I never talked to my imaginary friend since? Goosebumps whenever I'm back in this house now. I was visiting my grandfather's grave for the first time, and as I approached it a golden retriever appeared out of nowhere. He sat with me as I sat next to the grave, his head resting on my knee. As I was leaving I turned around, and the dog had disappeared. Rationally speaking, I know that it was a dog, not connected to my grandfather at all, but part of me still likes to think that he came to say goodbye to me that day. This isn't eerie, it was terrifying. I was 13-14ish and had couple of my baseball team friends over to spend the night, and we kept hearing this thud. After a few more times we decided to check it out. We grabbed 3 baseball bats out of my laundry room, look all over the entire house, checked to make sure it wasn't my dad in the last room we looked in. I looked out and saw a man trying to climb through the window. He saw us and got the hell out of there. No sleep was had that night. When I was a kid, I was playing hide-go-seek in the woods behind my house with some friends. I had a great hiding spot behind some thick bushes. I saw a man walking down the trail towards me. As he got closer, I remember him having no face at all. No facial features, just the skin. I froze and started crying. The man kept walking by me. I ran home and never told anyone about it because I thought I was crazy. I finally told my mom about it when I was in high school. She told me about a man that lived in our neighborhood who had failed a suicide attempt and seriously disfigured his face. He never walked the main streets, taking the back trails of the woods to go to his job and a bar where he drank all night. It's possible I saw him and was so mortified that I actually blocked out his face. Creeps me out to this day because I remember it vividly. A family friend's kid died when he was really young. The day of his funeral, it was really dark and stormy and just horrible weather. The service was outside, and when his mom was addressing everyone she said something along the lines of "I just feel like he wants to say goodbye." She looked up and the clouds parted, and for a few seconds the sun shone with an amazing brightness and warmth before the clouds returned, and she continued with her speech. It was when I was about 4 years old, and it has stuck with me as the strangest thing that I have ever witnessed. A few years ago my phone rang at around 4 a.m. This was weird as it is, as a 4 a.m. call usually means something bad. I hastily grabbed my phone and looked to see who it was. No number. I answered hello. The voice on the other end was a girl, but her inflection was the saddest I've ever heard. It sounded like she was about 2 seconds away from killing herself. She says, "Are you sleeping yet?" This freaks me out, but I'm not sure I'm hearing correctly and I say, "Sorry, what?" She asks again, "Are you sleeping yet?" This time with more intensity. Her voice is the eeriest part, it sounds more panicked, and now I'm pretty freaked. I say, "Who is this?" "Anna." "Who?" "Anna." I don't know anyone called Anna, so I threw the phone down and was like, nope. Not happened to me, but to my mom, brother and dad. In our old house, strange things used to happen. It was never anything serious, but balls would roll around without any starting momentum, the kettle would switch itself on and doors would lock themselves from the inside and outside whenever my brother was in the room. My mom is into her supernatural side, so she asked the neighbors if anything had happened in the house previously, and it turns out the owner before that previous owner was a single mom called Jan whose only son went off to fight in World War II, and died on the beaches of Dunkirk. My mom thought that these occurrences were linked to this woman and her dead son, especially the rooms locking themselves with my brother inside, so she sat down and said something along the lines of, Jan, I know what happened to your son, and I am sorry. You can help look after mine, just please stop scaring us and don't hurt any of us. And within 24 hours all of the creepy shit had stopped, except the front gate would lock when someone left the house, and be unlocked when they got back. This didn't happen to me personally, but to my GR.6 teacher and her husband. It seems pretty appropriate, so I thought I'd share. I guess a little while after starting a family, they decided to buy a cabin up in northern Ontario, like a little summer getaway sort of deal. They looked around for a bit, trying to find something that would fit their specifications, mostly a place nice and out of the way, not super crowded around a single lake like you see with a lot of cabin properties in Ontario. Anyhow, they eventually found a place that was perfect, about a half-hour drive or so from the nearest town, on its own little lake and everything, perfect little spot, and affordable too. See, I guess things first started to get a little strange with the circumstances of how the place came up for sale. It was a property that had been taken back by the bank, because its original owner just sort of disappeared. One day he's making payments, the next, the place is abandoned, and he can't be reached anywhere, just gone. And it's not like this was some sort of little shack, I mean it was a smaller place, but the guy had sunk some serious cash into it with renovations and the like. So they buy the place, move some of their stuff up for the summer and settle in with their kids. Everything's great. Everyone's having a good time, but I guess one day my teacher's sitting in the living room portion of the property, and she realizes something. She grabs the layout plans of the cabin, which they received after purchasing the place, and starts to really look them over. Soon enough, it dawns on her that something's not quite right. See, there's another room marked out on the layout that isn't in the cabin. Or so it looks. She walks over to where the door should be, and it's a wall. But then she realizes that with the angles and lengths and whatnot, there actually might be another little room behind it. So she shows it to her husband, and he's pretty intrigued, and says, hey, why don't we bust open the wall and see what's behind it? They had been thinking about redoing the room a bit anyways, so they went right ahead. The boards come down, and true enough, there's a bricked up doorway. Her husband take a good swing at the bricks with a sledgehammer, and it goes right through. There was another tiny room. Now this is where things really take a turn for the eerie. The room is about the size of a large closet, square, plain walls, wood floor, nothing too crazy. It's what's inside of it though that was strange. A single wooden chair, facing away from the door with a light bulb hanging down from the ceiling directly over it. And on the wall that the chair was facing, was a small, painted self-portrait of a man, in a dirty wooden frame. The picture was clearly done by an amateur, but it was kind of distorted. The colors were dark, and the guy in it was just staring forward, with these dead, gray eyes, and his mouth a little open. It was unnerving, to say the least. They got rid of the contents of the room and actually just ended up boarding it up again. I guess they couldn't find a use for such a small space, or maybe they just still found it too creepy. I dunno. What I do know, however, is that if I were in that situation I would have burned that fucking cabin down, and never looked back. I was sleeping in my bedroom when I still lived with my parents, but hadn't slept in the house for a few years. This particular night, I ended up sleeping at the house for whatever reason. In the middle of the night, I would hear my name in a soft, childlike voice, then a very soft whining. Then I would hear it again. Over and over again. I laid in bed scared shitless, until I got up to investigate, found out it was the DVD player making weird noises, and I had convinced myself it was speaking my name, trying to lure me out so it could feast on my entrails. I was on a stretch of highway in Iowa. Totally flat land, cornfields in every direction. There was only one other car on the highway, There was a black Cadillac sedan in front of me. I decided to pass it. As I passed it, and checked my blind spot to merge back into the right lane, it was completely gone. Just disappeared. I was the only car to be seen anywhere. I know I had been driving behind it for quite a while. I had noticed it because you don't often see a black Cadillac sedan in the cornfields of Iowa. It was there as clear as day, and then it just wasn't. There were no exits, it didn't pull over to the side. It just vanished. I only wish I had looked over at the driver as I passed. It's one of those weird little experiences we have that we'll never find out the answer to. This happened a few years ago when I was living with a roommate in a mobile home. I was home by myself sitting in the recliner listening to music very softly with the lights out and the blinds opened. It was a bright full moon that gave the place a very soft amount of light, enough to navigate about easily without turning any lights on. As I sat there, at once I heard what sounded like my roommate's bedroom door open, and I could feel the pressure change in the room immediately, followed by the floor sounding as if someone was walking across it. Not the sound of footsteps, but the sound of the floor moving. The steps continued right up to me, stopping where what felt like someone standing over my right shoulder. That sense of presence. I instantly got a full body chill and goosebumps and was too frightened to turn and look. I quietly and calmly said aloud, "What's up? Do you need something?" After a few seconds of calling out, the feeling of someone standing there went away. I got up, turned on lights, double-checked the doors and windows making sure they were shut and locked properly, and also checked my roommate's bedroom door. It was shut tight, no one in there, window shut and locked. Didn't get much sleep that night, but I do remember falling asleep with all the lights on. Haven't experienced anything like that since. I was at my aunt's house when I was 12, being the youngest she ordered me to go to bed. I had to sleep in the creepy room of my cousins who collected porcelain dolls and laid them atop her shelves. I caught one doll's reflection in the mirror and I swear to God its eyes moved. In my bedroom when I still lived with my parents. They were separated acrimoniously under the same roof, and my bedroom wall was also a wall for my dad's bedroom. One night, I woke up with a start at about 2 a.m. It was really windy outside. I could hear it howling as it did down the street. With the wind came the strongest sense of foreboding. I felt like something bad was rushing towards our house. I clung to my blankets and held my breath. Then, in the corner of my room, where I shared a wall with my dad, I saw this face appear. It was like a hologram. I could see the cabinet right through it. It was this giant, evil-looking demonic face, sort of upside-down triangle-shaped. It narrowed its eyes at me and dropped its jaw impossibly low in this snarl at me. I freaked right out, just staring at it. Then I scrunched my eyes closed and started breathing deeply, imagining white light around myself and thinking, just ignore it, just ignore it. After what felt like forever, it was like a weight lifted out of the room, and I peeked out from my blanket and it was gone. The next day, I told my mom that something freaky happened in my room and I didn't want to sleep in there again. So she was like, "Okay, you can take where I've been sleeping in the study, and I'll sleep in your bed." So that's what we did. The next morning she walked with me to school and after a few minutes of silence she said, "You know, I saw the strangest thing in your room last night," and proceeded to describe exactly the same face that I saw. She slept in another downstairs room after that, and after Dad finally left, she took the main bedroom upstairs, but I kept a room downstairs. We never used my old room as a bedroom again. And Mum sold the house literally last week. This was only in 2007 as well. I was 18. A couple years ago I woke up in the middle of the night and decided to go downstairs to get a drink. I found my 8-year-old brother staring down the sink drain, and when I asked him what he's doing he just said they're coming. He was sleepwalking, so I took him up to bed. I was 14 at the time, and I'd already had a few experiences on the paranormal side, but this one was the most substantial and the one where I was most exposed. It also happened alone and in the dark. I'd spent a lovely evening talking and laughing about teenage stuff with my friend, and I eventually embarked on my walk home alone. I lived about 10 to 15 minutes from my best friend, and it was about 10 or 10:30 p.m. when I set off. This was very late for me. The air was crisp and traffic was very slow. In my old town this is the time when people are either cozily locked up in their homes, or enjoying the last hour before last orders. There were streetlights every few hundred meters apart, but most houses had their lights off. I technically only lived 3 streets away, a short road, a longer stretch, and then into my cul-de-sac. As I came near to the top of my friend's street, a figure appeared from a side road in front of me. She's on the same side of the road. I say she for two reasons. Firstly, she was dressed head to foot as a lady from the Scottish Widows adverts here in the UK. Google it. Today, I'd more likely associate her attire as a woman wearing a floating burqa. I don't think even one family in my small town dressed this way, and I certainly had never seen this before, and never did again for many years after that for that matter. Secondly, I just knew she was a woman. I also just knew she wasn't from this world. My goosebumps had already started to raise on my forearms, but at this point, my rational brain told me that I was bound to be unnerved by anything unusual while alone in the dark. I kept a safe distance and kept my eyes transfixed on the sashaying figure in front of me. My body was on full alert, and I can still remember my adrenaline levels building and building until I felt a constant buzz in my fingertips. As she turned to her right, around a tall hedge and into the second street, I still remember imagining she had just stopped dead in her tracks and was waiting for me on the other side of the hedge. My heartbeat started racing and I edged sideways until I was practically in the road. As I came around the corner, she had definitely dropped her pace and was considerably closer than before. At this point I was just glad I hadn't come face to face with her. I slowed down my pace, which made me realize that this agony was going to last even longer. Slowly she walked past the first of two churches, which happened to be along this route. A streetlight lit her up so I could see all the dancing folds and ripples the wind was making in her long black shawl/coat. I couldn't see a shadow though, and this made me panic. I wanted to check to see how my shadow appeared behind me as I passed the light, but I couldn't bring myself to take my eyes off her. Apart from feeling the bile rise in my throat and the sweat dripping off my clenched fingers, nothing happened for about 3 or 4 minutes. The only thing I can remember is that she didn't go down any of the side roads that we passed, and I was disappointed each time. I considered running really fast past her and hoping for the best, but I really didn't want to get that near to her. Not a single other person had passed us. Not a single car had driven by. We started to approach the second church and she upped her pace a bit. I stayed at the same pace and watched her intently. She was approaching the pathway between a school building and the church. Just as she turned into the path, a car's headlights emerged slightly on a bend in front. Other human beings were still about, heaved a huge sigh of release. The car slowed down as it came around the corner and towards us. The headlights were directly ahead now and I squinted. What I saw in front of me will always chill my bones. I still saw the wind ruffling her coattails, but the headlights were shining directly through her dark murky figure. This seemed to last for an eternity. The car finally passed and the lady had started her walk towards the church. I hung back and gave us a little more distance. I felt a burst of energy and my legs just took off. I never have, and never again will, run that fast in my life. As I came parallel to the path, my head swung to look at her and she was just standing there, facing me. Although there was just a black figure, I knew she was looking directly at me. When I finally collapsed on my parents' front porch, banging and kicking to be let in, my throat was burning from the rush of cold air to my throat. I couldn't speak for a few minutes. It took me a long time to make that trip at night alone again. Our apartment has high ceilings, so we got an 8-foot, bright neon yellow pole to change light bulbs. Last week, the pole disappeared. Seriously, we cannot find an 8-foot, bright yellow pole in our tiny apartment. We are deeply disturbed by this. I've got one that has stuck with me for years. When I was a high school freshman, I was frequently hospitalized for a health problem I've had all my life. Things were especially bad around then because I was going through puberty, thus causing my body to grow faster, which escalated my problems. I developed a cyst in my hip, right next to a nerve bundle. Doctors suggested that I undergo sclerotherapy to get rid of the cyst and end the pain. The only problem was that if anything went wrong during the procedure, my leg could have been crippled. So we thought about it and decided to take the chance and get the procedure done. But when the day came around, strange things started happening. That morning, a secretary called my mom and said that we would have to reschedule, because the surgeon was too sick to come in. It was the first time in the history of his job that he was ever that sick. So we rescheduled, and when, weeks later, that day came around, it happened again. At this point, my family and I got the feeling that I wasn't supposed to have that surgery done. I never did, and things got better on their own. It's a very eerie to think about, almost like it's more than a super coincidence. I always wonder how different my life would be if I had gotten that surgery. I'll go ahead and preface this with saying I'm not a religious person, My grandpa died about 12 years ago. He was cremated, and we had his urn placed in my dad's office, in our house, not an actual office building, which is the next room over from my bedroom. So it was my 8th birthday, and it happened to be a school day. I was in elementary school, and my mom would come wake me up every morning. I got to the point where I could sense when she was standing over me about to wake me up, just because I was used to it and it was the routine. So like I said, it was the morning of my 8th birthday, and I'm sleeping in my bed, and I sense my mom come into my room to come wake me up. I feel her come into the room, and stand over my bed. Instead of waking me up, I sense her walk to the corner of my room. This isn't what usually happens, so I sit up and open my eyes. I look around, and my mom isn't in there. I look to that corner of my room and there is a figure standing there who looks just like my grandpa. This scared the shit out of me, and I hid under my covers until my mom actually came and woke me up. To this day, I think it was just my grandpa coming in to look over me and wish me a happy birthday. Stayed in a hotel alone during a business trip. I hung a towel on my right hand as I proceeded to wash my face at the sink. When I finished, my left hand reached out to grab the towel, only to touch skin. Wheeled around and saw that the towel was hung behind the door instead. This one's a longer one and the weirdest shit that's ever happened to me. One night after work I went on a drive. At the time I was working 7 days a week, 8 to 12 hours a day. It was rough. Normally I went home and spent what little time I had with my son and my computer, but that night I decided to go for a drive. No reason, just felt like the thing to do that night. I even went pretty far out of my way to the complete other side of my smallish town, about 15 minutes. As I'm driving on this highway/strip I feel like a box is enclosing in on me. Nothing bad, more of a protective shield type thing. It was encasing me, guiding me. To what I had no clue. Then it started to feel lonely in the box, like I was missing part of it. I'd how to describe it, but a few moments later I feel like I was starting to link with another box, my missing box I've been searching for, all of 10 minutes lol, but man did it feel good to find this other box. But where was it? I'm driving and it starts to slip. I slow down and drive for a little bit going about 10 under the SL. Then I feel it. It's close, really close and I need to speed up. Then there it is. My missing box, right directly behind me in this car. I don't see it, just link up with it. Now I had no clue who was in the car behind me, but I knew where they were going. Somehow I was following them, but I was leading. I wasn't looking at him for clues, I was always well in front and just knew the way. We traveled for about 15 minutes off the highway on some roads I have been on maybe a handful of times in my life, but I knew exactly where this car was going. Where my other box was leading me. I didn't know what was going to happen when I got there. I just knew I had to meet my box. Finally I pull up in this driveway I have never been in and wait a few moments. Here it is, and he pulls in. What must he be thinking, I wondered. A girl gets out and walks inside crying and gives me a weird look, but rushes past. I get out now and know I need to go talk to my box mate. He starts to back out, but I beckon him to stop, come here. He doesn't. I just get in his car. Never seen the dude before, never seen me before. I get in and know his name. Just his first name though. It's Jeff. Weird, right? Yeah, it's weird. I knew he'd just gotten broken up with, pretty easy to figure out with the context clues, but I knew without having to use those. They were just there. I came in and talked to him. Asked how he was, what he planned to do. I got weird looks for a few moments, then he just broke down, told me everything. How she was his life and he planned on ending it all. I've never been much of a person to be able to comfort others in their time of need, but I wasn't that guy tonight. Somehow I managed to say all the right things to this guy. My other box. I just knew. I knew everything he needed to hear. After about 30 minutes of talking, I told him everything was gonna be alright. He asked who I was and I was about to tell him, then I just got these big red prohibition symbols in my head. I kinda shook my head to wiggle them out and they went away. I didn't tell him who I was. Just told him I couldn't tell him that, but to know he was in good hands. I shook his hand and got in my car, left and went home. That is the single strangest thing to ever happen to me. I still don't know what it was about to this day. Still don't get why it happened. On 4th of July one year, me and my friends went out on this trail behind a neighborhood to celebrate. We watched the fireworks from above the trees, smoked a few bowls, had good munchies. All that shit. I had to be home by midnight and the trail was dark, so one of my guy friends came to walk me out of the woods. Suddenly, he grabs me and says, "Ben 12, look up." Right now, there was a huge circular thing about 10 or 12 feet in diameter above our heads making some whirring sounds. After we're just staring after about 5 seconds, it shoots up in the air and starts flashing lights. It got nearly as high as a plane at one point, going around in the sky like a pinball. To this day, I can't tell you what it was because I really don't know. Nothing on the news, nothing from anybody else that anything ever happened on that holiday. It was only me and my friend that seemed to have seen that object. This happened when I was 11 maybe, so, my sister is invited for a friend's birthday party. Let's call her Janice. I tag along with my sister to the party. We get to the party and I know some of Janice's friends since we all bump into each other at school or on the bus. Anyway, I see a friend Susan of Janice's sitting all by herself and decide to go talk to her. When I do so I realize Susan was behaving rather weird, which is odd since she is nice generally. I don't pay too much attention to it and walk away and mingle with others. Towards the end of the night I see Susan sitting on the same spot and actually went up to her to ask if she had had anything to eat. She gets annoyed and asks me why I keep referring to her as Susan. I say, because isn't that your name? She looks at me weirdly and responds that it wasn't. I go up to my sister and Janice and ask them whether this girl looked like Susan or not. They agreed that she did, so my sister and Janice decide to go talk to the girl. After some digging it turns out that she was from another country and was waiting to meet her twin sister. Slightly confused Janice, my sister and I go home after the party. We spoke about it and found out from Janice that Susan never had a twin sister since she had met her family recently. To double check, Janice meets Susan in school and asks her why she was behaving so weirdly at the party. Susan says that she didn't know what Janice was talking about and that she was at home. Things remain slightly off with Susan at school too. Fast forwarding to a couple of months, we read about a murder in the papers, where a mother was murdered at her home while her children were there. Surprise, surprise, turns out Susan's mother was murdered while she and her brother were at home. After conducting investigations, the police find out that Susan in fact, murdered her mother with her brother in the next room, possibly the eeriest thing I can remember in my life. The first holiday season after my dad died, my mother had been cleaning up all of the decorations. My siblings and I were all under 8 years old and we all were pretty busy with school sports and stuff, so apparently, one Saturday after Christmas, my mom had to interrupt her cleaning up of the decorations to take us to some game my brother was in. Since we were all young, we all went with her. She left 2 big bags of decorations and a box of ornaments at the top of the basement stairs to be taken downstairs when she got home. The 3 trips it would take would have taken her a while, and we would have been late, so she just waited. By the time we got home, everything was downstairs in storage where she intended to put it and never did. No one else had a key to our house, but she called my grandma to make sure she didn't stop by somehow, and she hadn't. I was really little, but my older brother remembers coming home and thinking our stuff got stolen before they found it in the basement because he remembered my mom not taking it downstairs. But there it all was, put away perfectly. I don't know, there's probably a perfectly logical explanation. I've never thought too much of it. But it was really comforting to my mom at the time to feel like she had someone helping her somehow because she was so overwhelmed being a single mom. So if she wants to think it's paranormal, I'll let her. When our family dog died, I was in my early 20s still living in the home I was raised, an Indian family in the suburbs of London. As anyone who has had a pet will know, it was devastating for all of us and it marks the one creepy story in my life. The evening that our dog passed away, my younger brother walked into my bedroom at about 2 a.m. and quietly asked if I was awake. Of course, that did the trick and I said I was. Can you hear that? With such a question, I was wide awake in a nanosecond and sitting upright. I strained to pick out what he seemed to hear very obviously, but couldn't hear anything. He repeated twice there, "Can't you hear that?" I might add at this point that my brother is very level-headed. Very anti-drugs and anti-anything that results in loss of mental self-control. Very stoic. So I did not think then, or now, that he was imagining it and asked him what he could hear. I can hear Dad outside calling me. I got out of bed and in my sleepy state, I imagined that perhaps our father had gone sleepwalking or got stuck outside. Why, I didn't know, but I was trying to match scenarios to what my brother was telling me. He had never done either. So, we walked to my parents' room and peered into the darkness. I quietly called out, "Dad?" And he woke with a slight start, obviously a bit surprised to have both his adult sons looking into the room. This time my brother just said he could hear a voice in the garden, and now the whole family was awake. What followed would be comical if it wasn't so odd at the time. We all quietly trooped downstairs, and I picking up the nearest solid object, as now I suppose there must be an intruder in our back garden. Our garden is accessed by huge sliding glass doors. It means that you can see the outside clearer than the inside because of the ambient light from the street. As we walked towards the doors, it was obvious that the garden was empty. Again, my brother asked, "Can't you all hear that?" By now he was slightly bewildered more than anything. My father asked, "What exactly can you hear?" And he told him what he told me originally, "Dad, I can hear you calling out to me." I still remember my father's reaction when he asked him to repeat what he'd just said. My father's face showed a sense of recognition and sadness. He seemed to nod. He looked out at the garden and said to all of us, "Everyone go to sleep, I am going to stay up a while." At this point I just thought the whole thing was rather silly and happily trooped up to bed, and was asleep immediately. The next morning, I came downstairs and of course asked what all that was about. My brother was already awake, but my father was waiting for me to get up before saying anything. My father is a Hindu. The religion is the world's oldest major religion and is a unique combination of culturally led traditions, superstitions and dogma. My father is a humble man and never imposed the religion on us London-born boys. He even sent us to Roman Catholic schools without blinking, so he chose words knowing that his audience were in many ways removed from his beliefs, neither familiar nor overly skeptical. He told us that according to Hindu belief, when animals die, they don't know that they have passed on. Humans know that they have died, so, unless they have unfinished business, they don't hang about. But pets want to come back into the home that they have lived in for years. As they are on the outside, they call out to someone in the family in a human voice that this person will recognize in the hope that they will let them in. I went quite cold, and my brother was so unnerved, his face actually went completely blank. My father then said that he had sat facing the garden and prayed for our pet dog and told her to go in peace. I never questioned my brother about it, and he did not defend what he said he had heard nor started to fob it off as something imagined. We never spoke about it again. The house I live in now with my boyfriend was built by my dad in the 60s, and he rents it out and lives in another house in town. The guy who rented it last actually turned out to be subletting it, and the person he was subletting it to hung himself on the stairs. So when we moved in there were still flowers from the guy's family outside the front, and it was a bit creepy. It was much more creepy when my boyfriend woke me up on the first night and said we were too scared to go downstairs. In my sleepy state I asked why. Because he's there. He just rolled over and went back to sleep as I lay there, determined that I did not need a wee. Sleep paralysis causes all kinds of horrifying hallucinations, which seem absolutely real for about 20 seconds. A few I've had have been black shapes hovering, strangulation with rusted wire, and being impaled on a length of, again, rusted rebar, pinned to the bed. The more I think about it, the more I feel I should have said something. My sister and I were flying alone as minors when we were younger. Me about 8, my sister, 10. We fell asleep and woke up to a finger tickling our backs. We were naive and confused, and realized the man sitting behind us was sticking his fat fingers through the seat to touch us. We said nothing, and stuffed a pillow in between the seats to stop him. He tried bypassing it but gave up eventually. Nothing supernatural, but just as creepy. My last 2 years of college were spent living in a 2-story off-campus apartment with 5 other friends, 6-bedroom apartment. Throughout the 2 years, everybody had experiences with things being weird. Everybody would get the feeling of being watched and or not being alone. After a while, things escalated, and you would feel things you were in shake, like, if you were in a chair, your chair would shake. If you were lying in bed, the bed would start to shake. I don't mean minor shakes either. We all attributed it to the house just being old and it shaking with normal vibrations of the place settling, a large truck driving by, strong winds, etc. After a while though, we started paying attention and had to rule all of those things out. So, we started placing cups of water next to our seats/beds/ etc. We would notice that while whatever object was shaking, nothing else in the room was. I would be lying in bed and my bed would shake violently. Yet the glass of water on my nightstand right next to the bed showed no signs of movement whatsoever. One night the shaking was particularly strong, so I shouted knock it off. The shaking stopped almost instantly. A few weeks later, it happened again, so I shouted go bug Angela. About 10 minutes later, Angela came darting into my room saying her bed just started shaking for no reason. Could never figure out what the cause was, but it was all just very creepy. Once I was driving up on a motorway, midday, during holiday season. I expected a lot of traffic but it was deserted. A few kilometers ahead of me I spotted heavy traffic. I took a look in the mirror and saw a few kilometers behind me heavy traffic as well. That was a strange feeling. I had about 5 kilometers of empty highway for my own. It felt like something was about to happen to me, and me only. Final destination like. For a while there used to be something that ran around our bed at night. Would tug on the side like it was trying to climb up but couldn't. We have a very high bed. Didn't care much and dismissed it as half-dreams until my wife mentioned it jokingly as a reoccurring dream she was having. After I said I saw the same thing, she refused to talk about it anymore. Eventually it stopped showing up a few years ago. Don't really know what it was, but makes for an interesting story nonetheless. I used to live in a valley next to an area that caught fire almost every summer. Huge, raging things that would sometimes creep over the mountains. Anyways, one day I was outside playing in my treehouse when I noticed a big lick of fire crawling down a mountain that was very close to my house. I called my parents who came out and watched. The weird part came when we saw at least 5 different water bombers ignore it completely, in favor of going past it to the area that was really burning. The lick basically consumed the entire top of the mountain, and then receded. It was like an actual finger of fire came over, rubbed away the top of the mountain, and then left. It wasn't above the tree line either, plenty of fuel. I was riding my bike around a nearby lake, Sunset Lake in Sherrill, NY. I went down the wrong trail and ran into a wall, and fell off my bike. When I was laying on the ground, and a silhouette of a man walked by, stumbling in with incredibly skinny arms, inhumanly skinny. It was pretty messed up, because I got up right after he walked by, and he was completely gone. I was locked in my mail room one time. My mom was with me. The door to get out faced the street, and it was boarded up from the bottom down with nails and wood. The door we entered was password protected to get out and we didn't know the password since we had just moved in. You got to this room by the elevator. She didn't know that the door window pane was plexiglass. She grabbed the fire extinguisher and slammed it against the window pane and it barely budged, but the fire extinguisher let out a ton of gas/fumes. We waited there for 30 minutes in a locked, foggy room at about 9 p.m. After screaming for help and no one on the sidewalk bothering to help or call 911, these college-aged kids wearing all black tore down the wood that was holding us in and we got out. Mom gave them $100 split 4 ways and we went around the building back to our apartment. And that is how goth kids saved me from suffocation. About 15 years ago my great-grandfather passed away. My family was very close to him, and it was really rough. I mean, I know all funerals are, but my great-grandfather was a great guy. He was a business owner during the Great Depression and owned a few operations, grocery store, hardware store, etc., etc. He allowed people to buy on credit, and he knew full well many of the people wouldn't pay him back. Still, there were many people who didn't go hungry because of him. Anyways, we're Catholic, so we're sitting in the Mass in a very old neo-Gothic church. It's an old church with extremely high ceilings, old paintings, and the traditional church decorations. This particular church had a large setup of candles behind where the priest would give Mass. We're talking 3 pounds to 5 pounds heavy candles, and there were maybe 15 to 20 set up. As the priest is giving the Mass I catch a flash in my eye. It was in this instance that I see one of the large candles shoot up into the air and land on the floor behind the priest. With the exception of maybe 3 to 5 candles, all of them instantly went out. The priest didn't stop, he just continued on. No one said anything. I get to the car with my family, and I tell them what I saw. All of them instantly said to me, "You saw that too?" I told 2 aunts who I am very close to, and who are my great-grandfather's daughters, and they also said, "You saw that too." Any of the cousins I wasn't close to, they didn't see a thing. Weird. I've had many, but the freakiest thing that has ever happened to me has to be when I had taken a couple of Vicodin for the first time. I had a terrible migraine and it was the only thing I had that could handle it. So, I lay down and feel this cold breeze hit me in my back. I look up and my door is shut and window sealed. This was during the winter, but I have no ventilation in my house at all. I figure it was just my imagination and lay back down. I start to drift off into sleep. I feel my body relaxing, but it doesn't feel right. I try to open my eyes, but I cannot. I can't move. I start to feel my body sink into my bed. My arms and legs were being dragged into my mattress. I heard a cynical laugh. I still cannot move. My body is numb and useless. I sink deeper and deeper into my bed. I'm finally up to my neck. I can feel the floor with my feet. The carpet feels like it's burning me. I can't breathe now. The bed has taken in most of my face. My sister then barges into my room, screaming. I wake up and I'm laying on top of my bed. My throat hurts and my feet burn. I look in the mirror and see scratches all over my body, a ring around my neck. I'm not going to take more than one Vicodin ever again. When I was little, I used to sleep in the end room of my grandparents' very old and creaky house when we visited. It didn't help that my grandpa had thought it was okay to lend me a book on ghosts that had numerous stories about local ghosts in the area. Every night I heard a heavy breathing in my room, coming from the end of my bed, but there was nothing there. I proceeded to get more and more freaked out every night, even though my mom reassured me and said there was nothing there. I ran downstairs crying one night as a result and found only my grandpa downstairs asleep on the sofa, snoring below my bedroom. When I was a kid, I went away to the same summer camp several years in a row. It was held at the Cedar Lakes Conference Center in WV. The grounds were really lovely, but there was also something about the lakes. There were several small lakes on the grounds, situated between the main hall and the cabins. There were footbridges that crossed them, to shorten the walk. The bridges were low, almost touching the water's surface. During the day, everything was beautiful and peaceful. But at night, on the last night of camp, there was a dance in the main hall. I left to walk back to my cabin to get something. I don't remember what, something stupid I am sure. As I walked toward the last footbridge, a sense of dread started creeping up my back. The lake was black and incredibly still, and there were tiny puffs of fog floating across the surface. I didn't turn back, because I needed whatever the thing was I had gone to get, and I didn't go around because the walk would have been much longer. I was feeling okay, reassuring myself, until I got to the middle of the bridge. As soon as I was far enough that there would be no point in turning back, the dread ramped way up. I can't explain where the feeling came from. It was as if suddenly I was the only person for miles and miles, like there was no one else on earth at all. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I had to get off the bridge, that it would all be okay if I could just get off the bridge. Near panic, I was walking as fast as I could, but the bridge was longer than I remembered. In my memory, I swear it went on for 10 or 15 minutes, though I know that can't be true. I even pulled out my cell phone to call my mom, which would have been a no-no. It was just for emergencies back then, but there was no reception. In the end, I got to the other side and was fine, but the world seemed different. Looking back as an adult, I can guess that I was probably picking up on lots of little environmental things that caused my unease, and that it was the first chink in my adolescent armor of invincibility which caused the panic. I can guess, but I can't quite convince myself that I was perfectly safe that night. Not me, but my grandmother grew up on Mackinac Island with her two sisters. As I was told, one night her and her two sisters were walking home from a bonfire-type get-together on a dirt road that they frequently traveled. Well, this time, just as they were halfway through, the ghastly outline of a man in a guard's uniform for the Grand Hotel appeared and scared them into returning the way they came and finding a separate route home. Later that night, two other girls walked down the road and were raped and murdered, thus essentially saving my grandma's life and her sister's. Freakiest part, their father, who had died years before, was a former guard at the Grand Hotel. I went to an all-girls convent/boarding school when I was little. The school doubled as a Civil War hospital back in the day, and this was the type of place where the nuns proudly showed off the bloodstains on the floors and rooms upstairs that weren't used as classrooms. There were many creepy stairways, hallways and bedrooms that we usually didn't see, and many that were unused. This was a huge building, but had few students. One day, a friend of mine and I were being punished for something ridiculous like talking or laughing. We were sent to scrub the stairs with toothbrushes in one of these creepy, empty hallway we never used. I'm really not kidding. Atheist here, since it was an eerie, dogmatic environment anyway, There was odd religious paraphernalia everywhere. An especially old, seriously scary statue of the Virgin decorated the hallway at the bottom of the stairs, chipped paint, realistic glass eyes. We had finished working, top to bottom, but needed to walk back up the stairs to shortcut through the building. You had to walk by the statue to get to the stairs, and this thing watches us walk by, and walk up a few steps. It was making eye contact, its eyes were moving, until we both booked it up at the same time, screaming bloody murder and both convinced we were destined for hell. So I was with this chick I had just started dating, and we're making out. It was going real nice. I was thinking I might get lucky. Then my cell phone starts ringing. I ignore it because I'm making out with a hot babe. It rings again. She stops kissing me and gives me that look of just go ahead and answer it. So I answer it. The voice on the other end is one that I'll never forget. "What are you doing with my daughter?" Creeped me right the hell out. Sounded like this guy was about to beat the hell out of the next person he could get his hands on. I hang up immediately. My lady friend asks who it was, and I tell her what happened. She stared at me with a very concerned expression. She said my dad is dead. This is likely to get buried, but here goes. When I was 14, my parents went out one night and left me home alone and apparently left the garage door open. I was busy interneting, chatting with people and whatnot in the library, and I see a reflection of someone in my computer screen behind me. But how could that be since I was home alone? I felt the breathing on my neck but was far too freaked to turn around and face the stranger, so I kept chatting with my friends, trying hard and failing at alerting them to the fact that there was someone in my house that did not belong. Luckily my parents turned down the drive and I guess he decided to run when he saw the lights pour into the window. I turned around just in time to catch him running out of the room and evidently out the back door. My parents said they saw someone standing behind me, but police found no evidence. Back when I was around 12, me and my brother were over my dad's house. I slept on one side of the room where I could see the opening in the door while it was mostly closed. He was on the other side of the room. I wake up in the middle of the night and hear the sound of someone coming up the stairs. I think nothing of it, just think it's my stepmom going to bed. I see this big shadowy figure look through the door and look at me, then leave. I fall back asleep and next morning asked why she looked through the door, and she said she had already gone to bed and though it was one of us coming up the stairs from getting a snack. To this day we are unsure of who/what it was. I lived in Germany for several years with my family. My dad was in the military, but we decided to live a base in a nearby village. More space, absorb the culture, etc. It was a fairly old place, so when I hear noises in the night I'd try not to think about it too much, but some nights I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone in my room. I started to have weird experiences. It began with me sitting on my bed one night doing homework when I noticed something which I can only describe as a mist or fog moving over my bed. I wouldn't have noticed it on my light-colored sheets, but I had a black binder it was moving over as well. I was fascinated. Whatever it was didn't scare me and I'm not sure why. It stopped after 5 minutes and I went to tell my mother, who I knew was more sensitive to this sort of thing. She proceeds to tell me that she thinks something is in our house. She had also had some weird experiences herself. My brother was 3 or 4 at the time, I was in my teens, and when he woke up in the middle of the night he'd get up and go to my mom's side of the bed and stand there quietly until she woke up. A lot of kids do this, it's so creepy. So my mom tells me some nights she'd hear footsteps come over to her side of the bed, but she knew it wasn't my bro. She'd eventually look and sure enough no one was there. Even my dad, who doesn't believe in anything paranormal, would say, "Bro's name, go back to bed," and my mom would tell him it wasn't my bro. He'd even get up to check and little bro was still in bed. There were other things too, like my mom would be downstairs and she'd hear someone say mommy or mama from upstairs. I heard someone call my name from upstairs once also. But the really freaky moment was when I was talking on the corded phone in my parents' bedroom during the day, when suddenly this mist/fog in the very distinct shape of a little boy walks directly in front of me as I sat on the end of the bed. I dropped the phone and noped out of there. To this day though, even though it was never malicious in any way, my mom is convinced it wasn't really a boy, but something pretending to be one. One night in the summer last year I had a nightmare and got up at like 1 in the morning. I opened my door and directly across my hallway I could see this really big shadow and I just looked at it for a second. I thought my dad was getting home late because he works really weird hours, so I was like, "Hey Dad." The figure turned around and it was most definitely not my dad. I froze and ran down my stairs and stood there for a second. I was half asleep, so I was really confused. Next thing I know, it's coming down the stairs and I start screaming at it to get out of the house. It felt like I screamed for 15 minutes, but it was probably only like 30 seconds. I don't remember what happened next, but I woke up on my couch. My mom is a very light sleeper, but she didn't get up, so I'm assuming it was a dream. The only thing is, I don't sleepwalk, so how did I get to the couch? Once I went to phone my grandparents, but couldn't remember whether the last digit in the number was 7 or 8. I figured what the hell and guessed. Anyway, I picked the wrong one and some guy who clearly wasn't my grandpa picks up, so I apologize and say I have the wrong number. He says, "Is that my name?" A bit creeped out, I say ... yes, who is this? He just laughed and said, "You don't recognize my voice, do you?" I froze for about a minute before saying bye and hanging up. To this day I have no idea who he was or how he knew me. When I was roughly 10 years old, I lived in an old house on a military base in South Carolina. It was an interesting house. The front door opened to 2 staircases, one going up and the other going down. Downstairs was partially underground and had the living room and kitchen, while the upstairs had the bedrooms. Because the house was old, the climbing the stairs resulted in a loud creak with every step. One day I was downstairs playing my Nintendo 64 while my baby brother slept upstairs in his crib. Since the stairs were loud, my mother made sure I understood that I was not to go upstairs because she did not want my brother waking up. Obviously I had no problems with this because I was engrossed by my Nintendo. I was interrupted by my mother yelling, "Damn it, I told you not to go upstairs." When I ran into the kitchen to tell her that I didn't go upstairs, we heard my brother start screaming. My mother freaked out and ran upstairs, but everything is ultimately okay. Evidently what had happened was my mother had the stairs creaking like someone was walking up them. When she got into my brother's room, she said it was freezing. After that day, he always screamed when my parents put him in that room and he refused to sleep in there. There are other stories about that house, but they are relatively uninteresting. They amounted to finding odd things that might be a face in photographs, electrical applications randomly turning off in front of us, arguably the least freaky thing, as it can be explained logically, and my own personal experiences, such as seeing things walk by my door when I was in trouble. I think they finally demolished all of those houses. I hope so, because whether or not there was anything supernatural happening in that house, I had trouble sleeping until around my junior year of high school, and the dark still unnerves me. I have a pretty creepy story. It's short and sweet. My friend's mother worked at a mental person's hospital and was working with a disturbed man. She had no prior knowledge of why he was initially put into this hospital, but just did her job and kept him happy and fed him, etc. One day this man said, "Hello Marg," her name, "did I ever tell you that you remind me of my mother?" She said, "Oh thanks," and really thought nothing of it. Maybe he was just being nice. Well, a few days later a co-worker had told her that the man she was assigned to be helping was put in here for killing his mother. She then proceeded to quit and retire. When I heard this story I was creeped out. This happened about a year ago. It was around noon and my sis and I had gone up to our terrace to grab a smoke like we always did. Our neighbor's house is about 50 meters from our house and the windows of their top floor is clearly visible from our terrace. There was a girl standing up by one of the windows with her back facing us. My sis and I thought nothing of it at the time and we left after the smoke. Fast forward to around 4 p.m. I had just gotten out of the shower, when my sis comes yelling hysterically. She tells me that someone had committed suicide next door. At first I think my sis is messing with me, so I go up to the terrace and sure enough there is a huge crowd on people on the street. I look up at the window and see the same girl standing by the window in the exact same position, except she had a noose around her neck. We later found out that someone had seen the women down the street at around 11:30ish drunk off her ass. It then struck me that my sister and I were the first people to have seen the dead body but had failed to notice the noose around her neck because we weren't paying attention earlier, or we had seen her at the final stages of her life as she was readying to kill herself. That shit fucked with my head a very long time. My stepfather was stabbed in an altercation with a neighbor. The details aren't important. What's important is that he fell on me, and when we picked him up, I had blood all over my shirt. This occurred about 1 in the morning, and my mother and I got back to the house about 4 or 5 a.m., and there was a message waiting for me on the answering machine. It was one of my good friends from school, crying her eyes out, apologizing for the time, but she had just had a dream that I was in trouble and covered in blood. The timestamp placed the call just a few minutes after we had called the police. She lived on the other side of town and there was no way she could have known about what had happened. This one is so random and weird that it honestly gave me chills when it happened. So I work at a place that's pretty much a YMCA, and I was lifeguarding in the indoor pool. I leave to microwave my dinner. The lifeguard use a microwave in this multi-purpose room that people usually rent out for parties, baby showers, etc. Well, I walk in the room and everything is completely dark except for one row of lights that almost spotlighted the very center of the dark room. In the center of the room, these lights were lighting up the one object in the entire room, the book Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It was really strange, the simplicity and randomness of it creeped me out. It was almost like I was expecting something to happen next, like a cult popping out of nowhere, or the book to open up and shit. I went in the kitchen, microwaved my shit and got out. When I was a kid, I think I was around 8 to 10 years old, I used to go for sleepovers at one of my mates' houses. At this particular house I had epic trouble when it came to getting to sleep. I would literally toss and turn for 4 to 6 hours every single time I slept there. Add to this my friend and his brother who always said that their house was haunted, that the ghost had turned on all the lights in the house one time, even opening the fridge and pantry to turn on those once. Now with the above I'm sure you were young and had an impressionable mind etc. But here's the thing, I didn't believe them at all. I did not believe in the paranormal or the supernatural and I would just laugh at them when they told me these things. So, one night after playing Twisted Metal on the N64 I think it was, and during watching Rambo, we are in the rumpus room downstairs. There is a sliding glass door leading outside, a hallway leading to bedrooms and the stairs leading upstairs. The other two guys had fallen asleep, and so begins my attempt. After about half an hour I open my eyes. I am still completely awake by this stage. I was nowhere near sleeping, and I see thick fog everywhere. I was rather confused as to where it was coming from and it seemed to be coming from upstairs. The lights were on upstairs where they weren't before. It was at this point that I realized the doors are closed. They had been the entire time. There's this weird ass fog inside the house, about 3 feet off the ground and a foot thick, and it's coming from upstairs where the lights magically turned on. I almost shat myself with fear when I realized this was the ghost fucking with me. I slammed the pillow over my head and almost cried, begging it to go away. After 5 minutes I peek out and everything is back to normal. No fog, no light upstairs. Everyone else still sleeping. After a number of years I started doubting myself until I was about 21 and having dinner with my parents. I bring this up and my mom starts freaking out. It turns out that my mate's mom had told my mother that something had indeed happened in the house and strange things happened there, although she wouldn't say what because they were trying to sell the house. About the time when I was 8 years old and awoke with burns after several dreamless and sleep paralysis filled nights. When I awoke my leg was stinging with circular burns on the inside of my left knee. I went to the pathologist who took skin scrapings because my mom thought it was a bacterial rash, and the results came back as burnt tissue. The sleep paralysis lasted for about 6 years on and off. When I left the countryside and started living in the city, the paralysis episodes stopped completely. I grew up with an awesome caring family, none of whom smoked. I'll mention a few other occurrences. About age 12 or so, I remember the hallway light turning on at about 2 a.m. and a shadow passing my door towards my brother's room and the light turning off, which was the only other room, other than a bathroom, towards that direction. My brother's bedroom door grazed along the carpet when it opens and shuts, but I didn't hear his door move. I got out of bed about 5 seconds after the light turned off. No one was in the bathroom. My brother's door was closed over. I opened his door and awoke him. He was fast asleep. I then walked through the kitchen, 2 closed doors, lounge and living room towards my parents' room who were fast asleep. I awoke them both. They knew nothing either. It doesn't make sense why they would touch any of the light switches. It only happened this one time. Moving on, I remember in my early teen years seeing an entity, a 6-foot-tall slender dark figure standing in the corner of my room, slightly illuminated by moonlight coming through my cracked open drapes one night. I knew there was nothing in my room which could create such a dark shadow, so I just shut my eyes tightly, but over a few seconds became frustrated, mainly of being riddled with fear for so many years, and I decided to give up. I jumped out of bed towards the dark shadow prepared to throw the heaviest punch of my life, Then I awoke in daylight completely alert and energized with no memory or recollection of having ever dreamed. As if I had blinked and it was suddenly day. I started sleeping with an open 3-inch blade fishing pocket knife under my pillow from this night forward. My brother remembers feeling a long-fingered hand on his leg one night for about 30 seconds. He didn't open his eyes. My father and mother, pregnant with my father at the time, saw lights hovering over several paddocks while in their car returning from the Greyhound tracks. At first they thought it was a helicopter inspecting cattle, but the light was passing over cattle and the cows were not fazed or disturbed by any downdraft. My parents pulled to the side of the road and watched for about 10 minutes. My mom wanted to jump the fence and get a closer look, but she was pregnant and my dad would not let her. When my father restarted the car and turned on the headlights, the so-thought noiseless helicopter stopped moving and shot directly up with its bright lights still on over 5 or so seconds until it had seemingly left Earth's atmosphere. If anyone here has experienced sleep paralysis, you know how utterly helpless you are. You can only move your eyes. If you're wondering where I lived, the Otways, Victoria, Australia. Ask me anything. A few years back I was walking my dog by the woods that were down the street from my house and I had this woman scream from somewhere in the woods. She then started to yell, alternating between just pure screams of complete horror and yelling she didn't know where she was and needed help. I called out to her a few times and started heading into the woods. I was only 17, but my dog, Bear, is a big black lab mix, so I wasn't too worried about my own safety. Just as I get about 30 feet into the woods her screaming stops. I stand there for a bit, calling out to see if she is alright. No response. Then about 100 feet away from me this guy walks out of the brush, sees me and stops. He was a tall, pale, older guy with black hair and a wrench in his left hand. He was also twitching quite a bit. Bear starts to growl and we just stand there for a good minute staring at each other. He then asks if I heard the scream and said he had been searching for a while. He then said I should call the cops. We exit the woods and he went back over to his house, which was across the street, and continues working on his truck. I called the cops but they never found anything. I don't know what freaked me out more, the lady's screams or the instant they stopped and the guy appeared. When I was a small child I lived in a house with my family that previously belonged to an art professor. He died of a heart attack in his basement studio and no one found him for 2 weeks, per the neighbors. One morning my entire family was upstairs eating breakfast and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. When I asked my dad what the noise was he turned as white as a sheet. Other weird shit happened there and we moved after 5 weeks. Now I get creeped out when my 7 dogs wake up randomly in the middle of the night and go running to the front door while barking their heads off. My fiancé works nights and when he comes home they don't bark. Once when I was very little I thought I had read my mother's mind. I was quite young, probably around 7 years old when this happened. Now, at home we have an alarm system that needs a 4-digit code entered into it to deactivate. Pretty standard. As I was very young I had never entered or left the house without my parents, so I had never bothered to remember the code as they were always there to do it themselves. I had seen them enter the number, but not paid enough attention to take note of the numbers they were pressing and memorize them. I'm lazy like that. For example, if someone else is driving I never take note of the route they are taking. My mom and I had just gotten home from the shops and the house was empty so the alarm would be on. After getting out of the car my mom gave me the key to open up while she went to check the mailbox, which was at the end of the drive. She was walking away from me when I asked her what the alarm password was. She didn't turn around so I couldn't see her face but I heard her voice distinctly say 1953. I went inside the house, and entered 1953 into the touchpad. It didn't work. I tried again and it didn't work. Mom eventually got to the door and I told her that the number she told me was wrong. However, she then said that had not heard me ask her for the code, and hadn't said anything to me after giving me the house key. She had just assumed that I knew the code. I was a bit surprised as I clearly heard her voice say 1953. At that point though I decided that I must have just misheard something else. I asked her what the code was and she said 1952, so, the mystery voice was very close to the mark. Close, but not quite. It freaked me right out. I think I scared Mom a bit as I kept on insisting that I had heard a voice tell me the almost answer. Funny though, if I had have gotten the number right I would not have known anything strange had happened. At the time I thought that I had somehow unknowingly read my mother's mind. Now that I am older I still can't quite explain it, but I feel it was just my subconscious chiming in with the answer I was looking for. I had seen the code entered in many times, but just because I never consciously remembered it doesn't mean that my mind didn't pick up on the pattern without me realizing it. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.